My name is not important, and this is Biker Psych 101, where I ride motorcycles and talk about how they make me feel. So let's ride the Triumph 1200 XE and see what lurks inside my mind. Every motorcycle has an ethos, some succinct phrase that captures what the bike is all about. So what's the ethos of the Triumph 1200 XE? We're going to spend the rest of this video trying to figure that out, but as a place to start, I'm reminded of an interaction I had years ago at a gas station in Farmington, New Mexico. We'd been on the road for a couple of weeks at that point. We'd ridden a KLR 650 and a WR 250R from the northern border all the way up in Montana, and we were heading south all the way to Mexico. We were dirty, covered in the mud and dust of multiple western states, and it was almost evening, just around golden hour, and we'd pulled into a pretty rough gas station on the outskirts of Farmington, New Mexico for some fuel and coffee, as we still had a lot of miles to cover that night. And I was filling up the KLR with fuel when I noticed this guy on a Harley, kind of an early 80s vintage Harley, eyeing us really heavy. And this made me a little uneasy because, as I said, this gas station was rough, like really rough. It gave off a dangerous smell in spite of the fact that it was pretty busy. And if one's traveled much, you kind of know that some gas stations can be sort of like a refuge in a storm, while others, for reasons that are often difficult to describe, are kind of edgy and unwelcoming. Well, this gas station was one of the edgy ones. And here's this biker staring me down. I did my best to avoid eye contact. I filled up my bike, wiped off my visor, and wheeled the bike over to a parking space. But this guy kept staring at us. And eventually, he gets off his bike and he walks over to us. But as he gets closer and closer, I can see that he doesn't seem angry. If anything, he kind of seems a bit sheepish, like he's working up the nerve to ask a vulnerable question. When he gets to us, he stands there kind of for an uncomfortable moment. And when he does finally speak, there's no introduction. He just gets right to the point. And he just says, "So how does this work? You just point your front wheel off into the desert and ride?" He turns to kind of look out at the empty desert, and he points his hand toward the setting sun on the horizon. We didn't really know how to answer him, and so we all just kind of sat there, a moment of silence, until finally he lowered his arm, shook his head and said, "Man, what freedom." What freedom indeed. Maybe not as freewheeling and overland as he imagined, but right on the mark nonetheless. The Scrambler, especially in this large 1200cc Triumph embodiment, is what an adventure bike would be in an alternate timeline where we hadn't blown right past the Scrambler stage and into the dirt bike era. An alternate timeline where we recognize that part of the inherent appeal of adventure is the discomfort it causes. In 1980, BMW had an inkling of this new branch on the motorcycle family tree with the GS. In that new weird specimen, you see the dirt bike and Scrambler heritage. Stripped down, no fairing, big engine. But from there, in this timeline, the adventure bike took a different path. The path of hyper-optimization around sets of measurable specs, power, tech, girth. And for the immeasurable specs, we chose, sadly, to optimize for comfort. Bigger fairings, bigger tanks, electric windshields, radar cruise control, SOS buttons, and on and on and on. But this Triumph is something of a traveler from one dimension to another. A visitor from that alternate timeline where the Scrambler was recognized for what it was, the truest embodiment of adventure motorcycling, and optimized from that point in the tree for an entirely different set of specs. What might these alternate reality specs be? Well, there are the specs shared with our timeline and the ADV path we've taken. Power to blast down the highway at triple-digit speeds for hours on end. The ruggedness and suspension travel to tackle dirt roads and bumpy tracks. A sit-up and bag riding position. But from there, the similarities end, and the Scrambler starts voicing its other priorities. Take the cockpit, for instance. A Scrambler cockpit is uncluttered and simple. A small gauge cluster and a handlebar. When I mount my phone to the bars, it becomes prominent, whereas on most ADV bikes, it gets lost in the clutter of plastic. When I ride the Scrambler, I get one of the feelings I love the most about riding motorcycles. The feeling that I'm getting away with something that just shouldn't be allowed. Blasting down the highway at 85 miles per hour with almost nothing in your field of vision but your handlebars and a blur of blacktop disappearing beneath you. It's a pure joy. And there's something paradoxical about motorcycles in that the less motorcycle there is, the more aware you are of the motorcycle. A machine intended to hurtle your delicate body through space and time at rates of speed that only certain birds of prey can replicate. On the slower roads, you can comfortably sit upright, taking in the surroundings, but for long rips down the tarmac, you hunch down toward the bars in a somewhat effective attempt to become part of the motorcycle, so that the air will slip over you and let you pass without so much of a fight. On a Scrambler, you must adjust to the needs of circumstance, rather than the other way around.
So mine. I love it when we hide in the pale blue sky, floating on cloud nine. Do you feel the winds are turning round? 'Cause what goes up must always come back down. I'll be safe in your arms, like the light in the day never part. I'm looking down the line, with you by my side I'll be fine.
Of course, that big engine and its prowess on the highway comes at a cost off-road. When the route turns to dirt and unknown paths up mountain sides begin easily enough, but progress into rain-rutted uncertainties, you find yourself keenly aware of the weight and the effect that has on traction when you realize that the rut you're in is the wrong one, and the road points fantastically up and up and up toward the sky. Riding a Scrambler on the highway makes you aware of aerodynamics and the invisible soup we live in, as that soup thickens around us with speed. Riding a Scrambler off-road makes you aware of gravity, an invisible tar pit always trying to drag us back down the mountain, into the bottom of the rut, or to keep a dropped bike lying prone. Awareness seems to be a Scrambler theme. Awareness of the machine, awareness of the environment you're traveling through, awareness of your own body. It's a motorcycle that requires you to make accommodations with the world. It will not allow you to pierce time and space unaffected in an isolated bubble. But is this freedom? Paradoxically, I think yes. Comfort is like a drug. The more you enjoy, the more you need, until at some point it's the only viable condition you can exist in. And only certain paths offer comfort. You roll up to a gas station in New Mexico with a clean visor and a spring in your step. It's clear that you've let certain muscles atrophy. But you roll up on a scrambler or an underpowered and overloaded dirt bikes. You've got bugs plastered across your body and helmet. You've got kinks you need to stretch out. But you've also got a sharpness of grit, maintained and strengthened over countless miles of hardships, that lets you choose a variety of paths. The freedom to know that whatever the opportunity that arises, you can just point your front wheel off into the desert and ride.